So we've seen all four presentations, and as you know, according to agenda, now it's time for discussion. So I will, let's say, raise some questions which I consider linked in a way to your presentations, but they are also important for others, and in particular for us in Croatia. So please feel free to intervene. I will start with in the order of the presentations we've seen. So I'll start with the Italian planning experience and with the topic of public-private agreements that have always been used as presented by Gabriele, but they went even further in Emilia-Romagna, as I understood, that negotiation between the municipality and developers is fundamental in the stage of the definition of the urban plan, as pointed out. And this type of negotiation planning has been also mentioned by in German presentation yesterday, if you remember, in Austrian presentation today, in UK, which is even more flexible. So it's something which is very common. I must say here that even 15 years ago, I proposed some sort of development bonus as a negotiable option in a general master plan for the city of Split, but at the time that was considered even as unconstitutional, and that has never been implemented, although it is still there. So my question is, what do you think from the Italian point of view, what are the prerequisites for a given society to apply these practices? And what is the public perception and sentiment on these practices in Italy?
Okay, thank you for your question. I think that prerequisites are that municipalities as public bodies have the have the funds, I mean the resource from an economic point of view, but also the civil servants that are able, that have the competence to build some public rules on this urban plan, because I want to be clear, in Emilia-Romagna region, there is still an urban plan, but this urban plan is a flexible tool. We need some civil servants that work for the public body that have the know-how to build the public rules for this urban plan. But I think that this innovation is very important because it translates an action or some actions that were executed in the urban planning, because even before of this law, in this region and in other parts of Italy, the urban planning negotiation was very developed also in the definition of the urban plan, not only in the execution of its provisions. And for the second question, I think that this law was criticized by some parts of the same party, political party, that decided to adopt this law. We have in 2002 a project of law that was promoted by the conservative part, okay, in Italy, but this law that was very similar to this one was not published. Emilia-Romagna region is a region where the Labour Party is the main one, and so a political party that has an opposite view of politics decided to promote this law. So the left part of the Labour Party criticized a lot this law, but I think it's a good law that requires a better know-how for the municipalities. But generally speaking, I think it's a very good instrument because we need that spatial planning is faster and is simpler. And these are the goals of this law. So my judgment is positive.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And now we'll turn to UK planning system. Vincent, I noticed when you've been talking about the legal acts, you mentioned 2004 Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act. So the name of the act indicates to me the importance of plan implementation, because compulsory purchase is serves that purpose. And on the other hand, in Croatia, we are lacking this type of instruments, or the attention to implementation is not paid in as much as in what you've been presenting. And urban land readjustment, which is also one of the implementation instruments, is a hot potato in Croatian system. It didn't work for almost 7 years when it was a part of the legislation. So without these instruments, we produce winners and losers with each new planning document, because some people gain development rights, some others get green areas and other lands which are not as commercial and as profitable. So how long do you think it will take for us, or how long it took to you to adopt these practices of equity in spatial planning, in distribution of development rights, and as you mentioned, among one of the principles, human rights and of all in the process? Unmute, please. Yeah.
Yes, actually, the title of that new planning law maybe gives the wrong impression. The principle of recognizing that one of the things that planning does is actually to create value in land in one place and hold it back in another, in effect. By giving planning consent and by withholding planning consent, you're actually manipulating the land market and giving land value to a particular landowner. So right from the beginning of our planning acts, the first formal one in 1947, in effect, nationalized land. And it was done in a context in 1947, which was so different in terms of people's willingness to act collectively, given all that they had gone through. It was established in a very clear, rigorous way in which there was compensation and betterment. So in effect, people who were losing out because they had to give up their land were compensated, and those who actually gained value had to share that uplift in value. That's been a principle throughout. However, it's been eroded ever since from the purity of that 1947 Act, and an attempt to reach some form of compromise with the private landowners, if I put it like that. In effect, what we have now is a form of developer contribution regulations, which is such that, in fact, it's in England, it's a different part of the Scottish Act and Welsh one, but it's section 106 in England, where in fact there is a negotiation on a planning consent, which actually requires contributions to anything that is has an impact on the community. So it might be for school provision, it might be for road improvements and so on. And that is a part of the planning consent. but more recently, they've been the introduction of what is called a community infrastructure levy, which is actually saying that actually you will contribute not to things that are directly affecting your required to make your scheme acceptable, but part of the contribution to the wider needs of the community. The clearest example of that was, I don't know whether you know of the underground upgrade in London, which actually was put through London in the 2010 and we all benefit from. But that was a £20 million transport improvement, which affected a lot of the boroughs, municipalities in London. And so there was a scheme brought that if you were within a certain distance of that scheme benefiting from that transport improvement, you would contribute on a certain scale. And if you were further away, you contribute less. So it was a levy, a form of taxation, dependent on to the extent you benefited from a scheme. And that is being applied elsewhere. So it's an attempt to compromise. One of the problems is that, one you've touched on, that the question of who gains is not just whether it's you happen to have where the planning consent is, but if you're living in a community in London where land values are just ridiculous, you can harness enormous amounts of money. So in the case of that transport improvement, I think something like, the detail may be wrong, but 25% of that £20 million was 20 billion pounds, sorry, was actually, it's not millions, it's billions we're talking about, was harnessed by the uplift in values. You can do that in London, but if you're in an old mining community, you can't do that. And I used to work in the west of Scotland, where land values were down at such a low level, there was no spare cash to contribute to anything. You were just lucky to get a housing development, people thought. So there's a question of equity there. And I think it's one that it hasn't been addressed. The place that has addressed it best in the British planning system is the new town system. When new towns were created, they were funded because when the land was taken over for housing development, people only got their existing value of the land. It was agriculture. And the enhanced value was given to the community to fund all the new schools and roads and so on and transport. And that's a principle which actually works, makes sense, is equitable, but it's not politically desirable for many people to apply everywhere. But it is the logic that should be applied, that if the public sector creates the value, the community should benefit from it, not just by accidents of history that you happen to have inherited a farm from your father and grandfather.
Yeah, thanks. But just one more detail. You mentioned the community infrastructure levy. Yeah, okay, I see you. Community infrastructure levy. Is it a municipal responsibility to design the instrument and its amount, or because we have it at the national level, which is limited, and then it is not applicable in the areas where the land values are very high. So is it municipal?
It's done at the municipal level.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing that I maybe should have stressed to people, I was interested in fact, in Styria, when you were talking, Eva, about Styria, that you were saying you were coming down from 550 to 300 municipalities for Styria. Well, England, with its 56 million people, only has 320 municipalities. There's a slight difference. I used to be responsible for the strategic planning of the metropolitan area of Glasgow, where we had 8 municipalities and 2 million people, an average size of 250,000. It's a very different world. And I think that's something, when you're talking about the needs of Croatia, is to recognize that, in fact, in Croatia, the nature of government itself constrains the best effective way in which to do planning. And I've always found that the French system is very good, because I think they have 30 million municipalities, 30,000 municipalities, and the departments act for the smaller municipalities, and the bigger towns have the capacity to do the planning for themselves.
Thank you. So Eva, you I
wanted to ask, I wanted to ask Vincent if this contribution the private landowners have to make when their sort of value increases, is that fixed in terms of percentage, or how is that done?
I will send, if you like, through Gracia, links to examples of that and the principles.
Yeah.
But it is set locally, and it's normally on a tariff related to the provision of a range of facilities. It's not just a kind of tax which is indiscriminate and it's hypothecated. It actually relates to certain forms of activity. It could be providing libraries, it could provide, but it's done locally. It's actually often much lower than it could be. I was involved in a major scheme in London, working with the communities, and what I recognized from the beginning, that the community were trying to negotiate benefits for the community, and they were talking about things like maybe 10,000 euros or 100,000. They didn't realize that actually the developers was willing to put 20 million euros on the table if only people knew the value of what they were getting. So they have no idea of the uplift in value. And I've sent a link to a garden village that's been proposed, where again, working with the community, I said, you have to realize this development is worth about £1 billion. And we need to get real about these and understand it. And in fact, the developers try and work it the other way and try and say, you have to produce a viability study to prove why you need this money and that we can afford it as developers. And I say as planners, we should do the reverse. And we can do that, and we are able to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's move on to Latvia. What I noticed during the presentation, among other interesting things, of course, is your comment on the public participation process, saying that there is no obligation for collaborations in the elaboration period of the plan, and the draft will only be liked or disliked. And this is something which emphasizes the difference between the participatory planning process and public participation allowed at certain point in the planning process, most often when the draft plan is completed and without a real chance to influence the whole process or to see what's going on in the time when the concept of the planning solutions are ready. So, and I know that some countries have a kind of possibility or option for commenting and discussing on the conceptual level. Among other countries, Montenegro, I know for sure, but it's common. So, what do you think? How to improve it, and do you try any kind of strategies to make it really participatory planning instead of having just 4 weeks of opportunity to see what is mostly done?
I think, thanks for the question, Gorgo. I mean, for me personally, I have to say, but I think Gunther should probably also comment shortly afterwards. For me, as somebody who is like relevantly responsible exactly for that, because in its initial idea and understanding social planning is actually exactly that participatory tool that we have. I have to say that I mean, this is something that is among us, as to say, those who are really dealing with the methodology of participation and collaboration. We try to come away from the term of participation. You may excuse us, but we think that this has been, similarly to sustainability, so much abused, this term, that it not anymore reflects the initial idea of what really should be done. And what should be done is that the emphasis is not on the post-development, on that after a plan is existing. For sure, I also was referring to that. You have, I think even in Latvia, up to 2 years afterwards, you can like complain against certain things. You can comment, you can actually bring it down. There are possibilities, and we have also like had incidents where even up to the constitutional court, since we are missing some kind of administrative law structure still in Latvia, which is a very difficult issue, I have to say. It has been done, but this is not the point. I mean, when we talk really about participation and when we mean it serious, then we should talk about co-design. And this co-design, this is not what means that the developer, that the area where you are in, the authority, plus the inhabitant, as there is possibly an inhabitant, and if there is a possible future inhabitant, then minimum that. But there are always also other stakeholders, that those are sitting together and actually doing the things together and trying to really look in the future that has a strategic value. And it is not just called strategic, but it has really a strategic value. A value that really then is sustainable, as for example, and not just like a stamp sustainability. I think this is the point, and to do that, I mean, Gunta's job for years has been, she was sitting in the parliament and in the commissions as the expert, as the voice of the experts. So Gunta is the one who really has an experience how to change the legal norms. My experience is more going in the educative level, and I think we need to, and that not in Latvia only, in all countries, even those highest developed ones, we need, as I said in my presentation, we need to raise the idea of awareness of planning. I mean, still we are lacking a course in schools which is called planning. Why don't we have that? We can even implement democracy learning there and everything else because it's so much part of democracy. So, I mean, if somebody would say like, when I'm 56 now soon, I mean, if in 20 years maybe there would be something existing like I don't know, a school course called urbanism or something, I would be really happy. And we would really like use the chance to give kids already the chance to read and understand the map and to learn how to deal with these things. And then we would really raise awareness of your environment.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Gunta. Go
Yes.
on.
I can add only that the law is from 2011. It's already 10 years old law, and in practice we are ahead the law. A lot of municipalities, planners are doing more as it's written in the law. And there are a lot of good cases, and especially now going the next circle, developing spatial development strategies with spatial perspectives, developing or working on development programs. The municipalities try to involve local people, try to involve politicians in the common elaboration process. Maybe it's not so easy as Jonas mentioned. We need some education in planning. We need planning education, not for planners, but for inhabitants, for people, for participate or to be with planners together work. And this really has started in Latvia. And I'm really happy that we are going beyond the official planning in reality. We have started this community planning exercises, smart village planning in the rural areas, trying really to do this planning together with the locals.
Yeah. One small additional question, since you are post-transitional countries as we are, and some other of the countries being presented yesterday. So, to what extent you consider equity issues as a barrier? Because from our experience in Croatia, public hearings, public debates are completely dominated, or if you wish, contaminated with people asking for their land to become buildable, to get gross floor area ratio as high as possible. So they are simply kind of pumping up their interests, and they just don't want to be losers in this game of distribution of development rights. And in a situation when this is not regulated and when this completely dominates the participatory process, how do you cope with this possible situation? Who is the?
Can I just comment on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned in my presentation the fact we now have a level of planning which is called neighborhood planning.
Mm-hmm.
This is a plan that is prepared not by the municipality, but by local residents. There is a whole process around it, which anyone can, if you want to look at, I can provide the links to. But it's a very disciplined process. Basically, if you take where I live, which is a place called Ensham, consists of 4,000 people. A group of, and it has to be, I think it has to be 30 people, but I forgot the exact number, who get together, register, tell the authority they're going to do it. The authority can't stop them as long as it's properly done. And they're not planners, they're local people who get together, carried out extensive consultation locally, talked about it, produced plans, got some minimal financial support for doing it, and produced their plan in detail about what they want in the community. And I deliberately didn't join the steering group, although people asked me to, because I thought this is to be prepared by non-planners. You know, there are enough experts around, and if they want to ask me about a bit of procedural stuff, I advise them, you know, informally. But I didn't get involved deliberately because it was about the community taking ownership of it, and that's what they've done. And it's an attempt to bridge it, and it's taken off. And it was thought that it would be good just for rural areas, for the very low density areas that you talked about you have in Croatia or Latvia. But in fact, the communities I worked with have been at the heart of London. If you know King's Cross, you can't get more central than that in London. But actually, it's working with that community about how do they make their contribution about what's needed for them when they're surrounded by these mega developments, and they've engaged in that type of thing. So there are ways maybe of developing new techniques. And the other one, I've sent out a link to the work of the European Council of Spatial Planners on participatory democracy. And that's saying we need to think fresh. And there are new ways of engaging people which actually go beyond just a formal consultation, which I think you rightly questioned as the right term. It's more consultation than participation, but there are techniques and there are ways of doing that. And even at a national level, I've been involved in something at a national level where we deliberately asked University College London to engage with local communities around the country to make sure that we had a bottom-up understanding of what we were saying.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. Next we go to Austria, and what mostly impressed me is really what I already mentioned, is the level of devotion to urban design, to detailed planning, care for townscape, character of the city, and are those documents you mentioned for some of them, they are not mandatory. Who initiates their preparation? Who is paying for their preparation? After all, is there a role of civil society in that way to contributing in the process and taking part? Can you explain it a little bit more in detail?
I think to understand the importance of these quality measurements or instruments, let me sort of first talk about the problem of our rural communities, where urban sprawl to the outskirts, the peripheries of these communities has really emptied the centers of these little towns and villages. And so with respect to that, it is seen that if the town center gains back some of its central functions that all have left the center of these towns and have, I don't know, moved to the outskirts in forms of shopping centers, but also functions like, I don't know, schools, building facilities, educational facilities, all moved to the outskirts because there is so much land there, and it's so much easier to build on sort of the green site than just within built fabric. So to counter this problem of dying city centers, and to counter this idea that basically our built environment is made up by individual preferences, and to bring back in this idea of the importance of society. Yeah, this is the context of why these instruments have been started, and there is federal and national support to do these. Yeah, so it's financial support from the federal states and from the national government to do these. It's not done mostly not done by private initiatives, but it's still sort of implemented and driven on this municipal level. But money comes sort of from the upper hierarchy to counter the maldevelopment that has been going on.
Mm-hmm. And tell me one more thing regarding you mentioned also rural areas, regional landscape level, which is your background, as I understood. What about the implementation of strategic environmental assessment? So it's a European directive. I know that all countries follow it, and we all do it in probably not in exactly the same ways. For example, in Croatia, we do it on a very detailed level of planning, although we have a very hierarchical system in which municipal land basically defines all the land uses within the whole municipality. So when you go to a lower level, it's just a matter of elaboration of building coefficients, things like that, design and other details. However, the system insists that practically all levels of local or detailed urban planning has to undertake the strategic environmental assessment procedure, which I don't mind at all on regional and, let's say, level of the whole municipality. I respect the fact that during the past, environment probably suffered, and the European Union wanted to have an independent parallel process to the plan preparation to do it. However, going to such a detailed level of planning, so how do you do it in Austria? Is it the same, or it's really strategic, because detailed plans are not strategic by themselves?
So, it depends on the impact of what is being built and what is planned. And if it has a certain impact, then you have this strategic environmental assessment. But all that concerns the more detailed level, the more municipal level, is negotiated within the municipality. Yeah. So only big things like, I don't know, a new an energy plant or a new highway or things like that have this strategic impact assessment, and not all kinds of developments on this municipal level. For instance, shopping centers over a certain size, and I wouldn't need to look that up. We'll need to have this assessment because the area of soil they are sealing is important, or is big. but basically it's not happening so often. Yeah, and this is also a problem. Yeah, as I already mentioned, if the administration in the federal state acts out its controlling function in a good way, yeah, then there is a lot of sort of benefit to derive from that. In the case of Styria, the controlling bodies are not very active. They sort of more look tick a box if it's legal or if it's not legal, but they don't really look for how big the impact is and how it conforms with the strategic plans. Yeah. And so it's very different, the situation here, but it depends on the impact, and most of the things are done on the municipal level.
Thank you. Maybe something related to this in some way, given the broader view of the spatial planning, which takes care of landscape, nature, water management, conservation. What Gabriele presented on Italian experience, so saying that some other, let's say, sectors or themes gain more prominence in the process over time, and planners actually do not deal or just take these things as inputs, as final inputs, and something that is hardly open for discussion. So what is the bottom line in terms of Italian experience? Is it does it change things to the better, doing it that way and having planners more focused on urban regeneration, on inner city processes and things that you mentioned in the presentation?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your question because of a problem on the internet. So you asked me
just your comment whether this is to the better for the let's say state of the territory as a final judge of the quality of what we are doing, and not the plans itself.
Okay, it should be, according to my opinion, as I said before, the landscape plan should be considered as the more inclusive, because landscape is considered a common good that includes both natural and artificial goods made by man. We call landscape as the connection between human and nature, also from a point of view that evaluates the identity, so the culture. So I think that all the planning activity should be developed according to these provisions. And what's the relation with urban regeneration, as you asked? I think it's difficult to answer just for one reason, because urban regeneration could be the phenomenon that gives much more autonomy to the municipalities, but they have to respect and they have to obey to other provisions. So I think that urban planning is necessarily influenced by other provisions, and it also implies some problems of bureaucracy, or urban planning is low also because of the protection of this interest. But I think that it's impossible to modify this system. The road is one, and it implies the necessary respect of landscape provisions. Also because our territories for the 70% is bounded. It's bounded by landscape plans or by law, by the cultural code. that establishes, for instance, that all the marine areas until 300 meters from the coast to the territory is bounded. So we have not many choice.
Thank you.
Could I comment on that? Because although we are the most centralized country in Europe. If you look at any evaluations, the UK is more centralized than anywhere. And so when we get directions from government, they clearly are powerful. But as planners, and my experience is that we just don't accept it. And we use the power of our evidence and analysis to challenge it. And over the years, we've actually helped to shape national policy from a bottom-up challenge. So just to give you an example, we challenged way back the policies which stopped us giving priority to the renewal of brownfield land. And we insisted that became a priority in the plan, contrary to government advice. It was put in, and now no one would even question that. We challenged the government when they said it should not give so much priority to out-of-town shopping. We were told that that's the way the market's going. We said it's going to destroy our town centres, and we challenged it, and policies changed. We said that, in fact, the policy of stopping development in rural areas was actually not, the national policy was wrong for areas when you're dealing with the remote areas which are farming and need to develop in the countryside. Challenged it, and government policy was changed. So I think my experience is, in a very centralized country, that planners should not just take it, policies, but challenge them. And the big issue is that policies decided at a national level cannot have evaluated all their implications for a locality. And our job is to work that out and actually translate and test whether it's appropriate. And if it's not appropriate, to take on the government. Now, certainly my own experience in dealing with a very centralized government is that they, in the end, back off and actually accept it, and often then steal your clothes and say it was their idea in the first place.
Thank you. And maybe one question for both Vincent and Jonas and Gunta. It regards quality control, which was one of the topic, but I won't be asking about the quality control of local or detailed plans. We discussed them quite a bit, but about the strategic documents, strategic planning documents, or in some cases mostly policy documents. So obviously they have to undertake strategic environmental assessment or sustainability assessment as a kind of ex ante evaluation, but I'm mostly interested in kind of ex post evaluation, monitoring of performance of strategic plans. Are there any way you do it, and how you measure, so to say, the success and implementation of strategic policy, mostly policy documents?
Did you want to start first, Gabriel?
Yes, you can start, Vincent. Yeah. And then Jonas.
No, Gunta, because I've said a bit. Maybe Gunta starts.
Yeah, okay. I don't mind.
I will unmute myself. Of course, we evaluate our strategic plans, and it's done by, it's done on a state level evaluation of, for example, of Latvia 2030 middle term evaluation, and there is criteria for each in this document, and then we evaluate how we reached what we have wished. Of course, it's for regional level, then evaluation is done by region, of course, at first by planners, and then it's the document, evaluation document is given to the politicians, and also on local level, we are looking how we are going on, what we have succeeded or if we have not succeeded. So in real, we are doing this job, and sometimes really we have happy that the ideas we have put it in these planning documents, it's realized. this. And I want maybe to add about environmental impact assessment that in Latvia, yes, it's not obligatory for all cases. For example, on a local level, when you start to, when the council has made the decision, you need to approach the agency responsible for environmental impact assessment and ask if this strategic environmental impact assessment is needed for your planning document or not. And it can be half to half. 100% you will need to do this strategic environmental impact assessment if in this area you have the Natura 2000 areas, then obligatory. But this strategic impact assessment is not obligatory for these lower plans. Yes, but my opinion is that, and we have talked with colleagues, that we need maybe more, not after, because this strategic impact assessment is done in a lot of cases by other companies, by environmental people, and afterwards. And it's good when it goes hand in hand with the elaboration process. Or in this starting phase, we need to take into account all these environmental things, not afterwards. So I think, again, there is a lot of areas for improvements also in this approach.
If I may add, sorry, Vincent, I just fall in still very shortly. I see that we have, maybe with a little bit of my eyes as still like sometimes trying to observe the situation as a stranger, although I'm referring here to the principle of the stranger by Simmel. I do feel that there is exactly in this moment we are touching ground of a critical mass. We have sometimes also to acknowledge and to be aware of that, as I just said, we have 1.7 million inhabitants. We are a really tiny country, and we do not have all around the global questions of everything, expertise and knowledge in the country. So we cannot, I mean, we are also not rich enough and we are not wealthy enough in order to like invest so much that we would be able tomorrow to like immediately take those, like the magician, take those those experts like white rabbits out of the hat. That it will not work like this. So if we really want to have a decent monitoring, exactly that what also Gunther was talking about, to have like earlier evaluation monitoring processes and a really good evaluation, especially now currently we have the biggest project for all three countries of the last 30, 40, 50 years, if not to say maybe of the century. And this is the Rail Baltica project, which will have an impact that is beyond any known spatial planning that has happened so far in the last definitely 50 years in the Baltic states. Then we really are dependent on outside experts. But we are then also really dependent on, for example, Vincent was mentioning them earlier, and is also, you are related to them, and we are for sure related to them, to ESPON and other organizations which are supporting us in this respect. So just to mention, there is sometimes also a question of a critical mass. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think it's one of the problems of small municipalities. And there's a need of how you build that collective action. And certainly on a personal level, on that question of resources, I mentioned I was running the joint strategic plan for the metropolitan area of Glasgow. But actually, one thing that was never really recognised was that we also were able to provide support for some of the municipalities who couldn't carry the expertise within their own organisation. It was an informal support, but it was quite important. Going back to the question about monitoring and evaluation, clearly it is a key part of the planning process. It's not just preparing the plan. If you don't monitor it, you might as well not start doing the plan, because it's just sitting there on the shelf. It has to be monitored, because every plan is almost out of date the day it's published. You know, if one starts with that mentality and you want to know whether it's actually needs, it's moved or things have changed to the point you actually need to review the plan to keep it fresh, because an out-of-date plan has no power politically, in my view, or experience. So you've got to have it there. The second aspect of it is the positive side, which is actually, I've talked about the influence we have had from my personal experience and working in teams where we've changed national policy, never mind regional and local. We've done that because we monitored. When we got to the table of discussion, we were better informed than anyone else. And monitoring is part of that information base on which we build our planning systems. And that has varied, as I say, I mentioned in terms of brownfield policy, which we changed nationally. We even changed forestry policy, which is not even controlled by planning, by demonstrating the impacts of forestry in our area. We were taking 40,000 hectares of forestry every year, year in, year out. And it was monocultural, destroying landscapes, destroying ecologies, destroying farming systems. We had better information on that than the Forestry Commission itself, who were the body statutorily responsible nationally to do it, such that they actually asked us to present that information to their own forestry managers so that they could understand their impact of their policies, which we were informing. So I think you shouldn't draw boundaries on what you monitor. It's what affects the community. And I think that it's also relevant to that issue of strategic environmental assessment. It's all about evidence-based. And actually, I find it very interesting, the conversation that's taken place, because my view, normally people appoint consultants who produce very thick reports on SEA, strategic environmental assessment and environmental impact assessment. And my view to the staff was, if you can't do it yourselves in-house, then you haven't done your work in producing the plan, because the information that goes into an SEA should be the very information that you have used in coming up with your own proposals and policies. Therefore, we did it ourselves. But what we also did, and this is the other aspect, is most SEAs are done just for the locality, for the plan involved. And yet, actually, we were saying that the argument for our plan was not just about its local impact, but actually its impact on the wider community. And so we actually did, the report contained two evaluations. One which showed, yes, we're going to have some adverse environmental impacts within our own areas in terms of loss of land and some habitats. But if we compared it with the alternative of that happening elsewhere, then in fact, it would show that we were a better place to put that development nationally. And that was important because we were dealing with deprived communities which had lost a lot of economy, where we had higher levels of brownfield development, higher levels of public transport use, higher impacts on communities that needed support. But we could only demonstrate that in a national context. So we were not constrained by the normal approach that is taken to SCAs and saying we're just doing our own patch. As you can tell, we never start with what we're required to do. We start with what we want to do and then see whether the regulations and instructions, and if they're not right, then we seek to change them.
Thank you, Vincent. So our time is slowly running out. I would like just to say a few kind of recap, concluding sentences. In Croatia, we always like to remind our colleagues of a long tradition of spatial planning in Croatia or Yugoslavia. When it started, very good, let's say, good outputs, good planning documents. But after changes in 90s, when pendulum of land ownership swung to the other extreme, we are actually still waiting for reforms, and this is a kind of never-ending story. And so I can say it openly, we need help in redesigning important elements of our planning system, and this is the purpose actually of this event. And I would, let's say, underline what Jonas said a few minutes ago, that small countries lack expertise, and it's a matter of critical mass, and it is something that is not easy to compare with the UK or Italy or other much bigger countries. So this has been a great opportunity for us to discuss important topics, to combine experiences from new and old Europe. We should keep on exploring options. I can just mention but a few, like strategic spatial planning. It exists, it's being practiced, it's important, but also it has to be monitored and evaluated, which is sometimes neglected. Again, about the detail planning, it brings value, visible value, as pointed out by our presenters. Urban land readjustment and equity instruments in planning are important, and countries have them and use them, and not only in Europe, because the land readjustment scheme, as introduced in the beginning of 19th century in Germany, is a standard practice in Japan and Korea, which are countries very different in many things, but they apply exactly the same instrument. We learned about the flexibility Italian way, flexibility Slovenian way on a smaller scale with the location checkup documents. We learned about the UK flexibility, where plans are even not binding documents. And we also learned that negotiation planning is not a taboo as it may used to be, again, from experiences from Germany, from Italy, from Austria, United Kingdom as well. And also we learned on some of the technical aspects of spatial planning preparation standards, in particular in some of the presentation. We got a good insight in all that. So I can say again, on my behalf, thank you to all of you, to your invaluable contributions to this event. And now I will let Niksha actually take over with the final comments on the whole event. Thanks again to all of you.
Thank you, Gojko, for excellent moderating of today's session, and also for summarizing today's discussion. So I have an easier task at the end. I can say personally that I'm really very happy about this webinar. I think we have really reached all of our goals and even more. I'm positively surprised by the audience, by the interest for this webinar. Today also we had a stable number of 270 participants who are still with us even after 3 hours after the beginning. I think this also shows us the interest for such topics, and I think we should really use the possibilities that we have with today's technologies to provide more of such discussions, professional discussions from different colleagues from different parts of Europe. I was very happy to hear today's discussion, especially the new insights, not only in terms of plans, but also interesting instruments for plan implementation. I need to say a big thank you to all of our panelists, both from yesterday and today's session. You probably know that this webinar would not be possible without you, your goodwill and effort, and thank you really for joining us, for participating. and for providing us insight into different planning systems in Europe. Talking from the perspective of a member of the Committee for Urban Planning of our Chamber of Architects, I can definitely say that we will use everything that we have learned yesterday and today in our discussion, local discussion on the reform of our local planning system. I'm glad to see that we are together with us our colleagues from the ministry, and I'm looking forward to our cooperation in shaping the new planning system in Croatia. I can also announce that we will publish all the presentations from this webinar on the website of the Croatian Chamber of Architects, probably sometime next week. So probably the audience is mostly local, so they will be informed through our regular newsletters, and to all of our panelists, I will send you the link. And we will also publish the very webinar in the shape of a video on the YouTube channel of Croatian Chamber of Architects. So you will be able to see it again, or maybe to send a link to someone who might be interested to hear these presentations and discussion again. Once again, thank you all for participating. Thanks to all of our audience for listening, and I hope to see you all in some near future in a similar occasion. So thank you and
Thank you
goodbye.
very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.